When Jonathan Fielding learned that the stranger he had been helping was his long-lost son, his family reacted with shock and fury, as if this man were a threat to everything they held dear. Now, he faces a choice that will shake even those who thought they'd seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. Jonathan Fielding, known in the business world for his sharp instincts and unwavering control, led a life meticulously managed down to every detail. This was a man who had built a multi-million-dollar empire from scratch, accumulating wealth enough for several lifetimes. His mornings followed strict routines, a freshly brewed coffee, precise scheduling, meetings with his assistants, and the daily commute through the city center. Every day, he would drive past a small, neglected park, never sparing a glance for the people who happened to cross his path. But on a chilly autumn day, a young man caught his eye, seated on a shabby bench in the middle of that park. Dressed in a torn jacket and worn-out sneakers, he clutched a grimy cardboard sign reading, "Help, any way you can." Jonathan felt an unexpected pang in his chest as he watched this young man. The look in the young man's eyes was heavy with exhaustion and a deep, unspoken sorrow that couldn't be hidden. Though Fielding was far from the type to involve himself in the lives of strangers, something about this young man made him pause longer than usual. This feeling was unsettling, disrupting his usual focus and reminding him of something lost in the shadows of his past. Jonathan tried to shake off the thought and concentrate on his day, but he couldn't forget those eyes, the weariness and pain etched into that face. An invisible thread seemed to pull him toward this young man. Frustrated with himself for his odd attachment, he was used to controlling his emotions. Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that he should pass by the park again. The next day, compelled by a strange urge, Jonathan stopped his car near that same bench. His security detail looked confused. Fielding never made unplanned stops, especially not for strangers. Approaching the young man, Jonathan felt a hint of tension. He didn't know what he would say, but was determined to help, without really understanding why. "This is for you," Jonathan said softly, handing him a few bills. "Don't ask why. I just feel like I need to help you." The young man looked up, gratitude sparking in his eyes. It wasn't the usual thank you Jonathan was used to hearing from people when he made donations to boost his public image. It was something more profound, sincere, and personal. This young man, Michael, was so moved by the unexpected kindness that he struggled to find words. He simply thanked Jonathan quietly, and Jonathan sensed a faint, almost familial warmth in his voice. This encounter should have faded from Fielding's memory, like one of the many charitable acts he performed for reputation's sake. But every time he passed by the park, he felt compelled to stop again. Each time, he felt lighter seeing that the money he gave Michael was making a real difference. Initially, he gave small amounts, but he gradually felt obligated to give more. With each new meeting, parting grew harder, and though he didn't understand why, he eagerly anticipated each visit to the park. Soon, these trips to the park became a private ritual. In those moments, Jonathan felt like more than just a wealthy man with money to spare. He felt important to this lonely young man. The meetings with Michael became something more than simple charity for Jonathan. He genuinely looked forward to these moments when he could step away from the chaos of the business world and experience a rare connection he couldn't explain. Each time, he felt a strange detached warmth and an odd attachment to this young man, but he couldn't place why. Their brief talks, Michael's simple words of thanks, grew more meaningful for Jonathan. Over time, their meetings became a quiet understanding. Requiring few words, they simply sat, sometimes talking about life and, occasionally, about Michael's few dreams. One day, as they shared stories about life's challenges, Michael grew quiet. His face changed, his eyes filling with tears, his voice breaking as he held back his emotions. "I wish I knew who my parents were," he said, taking a deep breath to steady himself. "I grew up in an orphanage. My mother left me as a baby, and all I have is one old letter." These words struck Jonathan deeply. He felt a sharp pang in his chest. He saw before him someone cloaked in a profound silence, the silence of loneliness that was foreign to Jonathan, whose life was always filled with people, noise, and the power of wealth. He listened intently as Michael handed him a small, worn letter he always kept with him. The faded words on the letter made Jonathan freeze. The name John flashed across the page, a painful echo of the past. Jonathan felt a surge of unease, as though something was pulling him out of his usual sense of control. Suddenly, memories of a woman he once loved flooded his mind. Recalling her gentle voice and kind eyes, he felt the bitterness of lost time rise in his throat. That woman, Anna, was the one true love of his youth. He could still remember how, decades ago, she had disappeared without warning, leaving behind only a note asking him never to look for her or seek answers. All Jonathan had after her departure was a wound he tried to heal with time and the all-consuming world of business. He accepted the note as a final word and never looked back at that pain. His life and career flourished as if she had never existed. But now, as he stood there, seeing Michael with that letter and a name so close to his own, his heart faltered. He forced himself to ignore the sudden feeling of alarm, convincing himself it was mere coincidence. But the idea that Michael could be his son was both intrusive and unmistakably real. Each glance at Michael revealed traits that felt unsettlingly familiar. Yet Jonathan strove to suppress these thoughts, determined to avoid the turmoil that threatened to disrupt his life. He reminded himself he had no right to dredge up the ghosts of his past, especially now that he had a family, a name, and a place in society. Everything he had worked so hard to build. These doubts began tearing Jonathan apart from within, like a corrosive, invisible force against which he felt helpless. That evening, he returned home, secluding himself in his study, and sat alone, reflecting on his memories of Anna. He asked himself whether he had made an unforgivable mistake by leaving behind a woman who might have given him something greater than all his wealth. Jonathan couldn't shake the thought that Michael might truly be his son. Emotions surged through him. Was it a sense of loss, guilt for his past, or a desire to finally find answers to questions he'd long avoided? Yet, he also feared the potential consequences. Revealing this secret threatened to destroy the carefully crafted life he'd built, his family, and his reputation. Despite all these fears, Jonathan realized he couldn't live without knowing the truth. One cool evening, he invited Michael to a cafe near the park where they usually met. After a short, almost awkward pause, Jonathan, struggling to stay calm, suggested a DNA test. Michael was taken aback, not understanding why this wealthy stranger was suddenly interested in his origins. Holding back a surge of excitement, Jonathan explained that he'd once been close to a woman, and circumstances had torn them apart. Now, seeing Michael, he sensed a connection he couldn't ignore. Though surprised, Michael didn't decline. He had always dreamed of learning about his parents, but now conflicting feelings warred within him. He feared that his past, his roots, might be tied to the man sitting across from him, the man he already respected and valued for his kindness, and who, just maybe, could be his father. With a mix of trepidation and hope, he agreed to the test. When the results finally arrived, Jonathan held the envelope as if this white slip of paper held his entire future. His heart pounded as a thought pierced his mind. What if he's really my son? As he opened the envelope and saw the results, his world ground to a halt. The paper bore an unmistakable answer. Michael was his son. Jonathan's meticulously constructed life of power and success was shaken in an instant. His first reaction was joy. Finally, he had the son he'd always dreamed of. But with each moment, fear and doubt crept in. He knew this revelation could destroy his family and his social standing. The entire world he'd built over the years could collapse like a house of cards. He hadn't even decided how to break the news to his wife and children before rumors of a secret son spread through high society. His family, who had considered themselves his only heirs, reacted with anger and suspicion. His wife, Sarah, was furious. She felt betrayed, her world shattered in an instant. She couldn't understand why he'd kept such an important part of his life hidden. His children, raised in luxury and secure in their future, now felt threatened. Soon, the entire Fielding family was at the center of a scandal. Rumors about Michael, the millionaire's newfound illegitimate son, spread like wildfire through high society. Every move, every breath of Jonathan's became fodder for gossip among the social elite and the business world. Business partners cast him wary glances, and journalists eagerly sought more details on the story. Jonathan faced a deeply moral choice: to keep hiding the truth and protect his status, reputation, and family, or to acknowledge Michael, a young man who had faced so many hardships, not knowing he had a father who could have been there for him all these years. He was torn between his obligations to the family that had supported him through the years and his moral duty to a son he never knew, but who now needed him more than anyone. Jonathan made what seemed to him both the hardest and the rightest choice of his life. Despite the hostile looks, scornful words, and outright resistance from his family, he decided to recognize Michael as his son and bring him into the family circle. This decision no longer filled him with fear. Day by day, he realized he couldn't turn his back on his son, who had spent his whole life searching for the love and support he'd been denied. When he informed his family of his decision, the consequences were immediate. His wife, Susan, felt deeply betrayed. To her, it meant the collapse of the perfect family image she had built with Jonathan over the years. She saw Michael as an intruder, taking part of her children's inheritance. Jonathan understood her feelings, but for the first time, he felt he couldn't abandon his duty to his son, even if it meant jeopardizing relationships he had once believed unbreakable. His children, who had grown up secure in their inheritance, were bewildered and shocked. Their resentment soon turned into open hostility toward Michael, whom they saw only as a threat. His eldest son, Jake, even tried to influence his father, openly declaring he could no longer associate with the family if Michael remained a part of it. Jonathan felt the turmoil within, torn between his love for his children and his duty to Michael. Yet, every conversation with Michael, every meeting with him, only strengthened his resolve to rebuild what was lost. Michael, seeing how difficult this decision was for Jonathan, began to hesitate himself. It pained him to see how his presence was disrupting the life of a man who had become more than just a father, almost a savior. One evening, he went to Jonathan and said he couldn't continue this way. His words came with surprising ease and sincerity. "Jonathan," Michael began, looking him straight in the eye, "I'm grateful for everything you've done for me, for finding the strength to acknowledge me and give me a place in your life. But I never wanted to be the reason your family broke apart. Money, status, and position aren't what I'm after. I only needed to know I had a father who would accept me as I am. You gave me that, but please let me go. I don't need anything from your world but you." These words shook Jonathan to his core. All this time he had been trying to give Michael what he valued most: money, status, and recognition. Only now did he realize that Michael's true desire was to feel connected, to fill the void that had haunted him all his life. Understanding the depth of his son's words, Jonathan did the only thing he could. He embraced him, finally allowing himself to feel the emotions he had kept hidden. This embrace became a symbol of a new beginning, a life where wealth and ambition took a back seat to sincerity and love, feelings he realized he might have lost long ago. Jonathan then made a decision that stunned everyone. He chose to forgo part of his fortune, dedicating it to a charitable foundation aimed at supporting children deprived of family. This was his way of atoning for past mistakes and helping others avoid the pain Michael had endured. By dedicating his wealth to kindness and support for others, he found a path to genuine inner peace. This story quickly spread and became a sensation. Newspapers were full of headlines about the billionaire who sacrificed status to build a relationship with the son he never knew. The decision inspired public support and sympathy, and people saw how Jonathan had found wisdom, relinquishing material wealth to rebuild the relationships that truly mattered. Jonathan finally found peace within himself, realizing that real wealth lay not in money, but in love and connection with those closest to him. His life was no longer built on glamorous appearances and prestige, but on the genuine emotions that proved more valuable than any fortune.